it might have turned out looking more like a grumpy man than the translating ribosomes it was supposed to look like, but still gives me the opportunity for a science lesson on color. And so color comes down to what wavelengths of light a thing absorbs. And so the color of a pumpkin is caused by, like, it has a lot of beta-carotene, which is a molecule that absorbs a lot of light that is bluish greenish and leaves the leftovers of orange light. So we see the pumpkin as looking orange. But why does the pumpkin make that color? Why do plants look other colors? And what is color really anyway? Let's talk about it. First, what is light? Light is basically just little packets of energy called photons, and these photons travel in waves. And the more energetic these photons are, the faster they go up and down and up and down and up and down. And therefore, the shorter their wavelength, because all light travels at the same speed, the speed of light. And when we talk about this speed, we're talking about getting from A to B, so like a straight line. But because they're traveling up and down and up and down and up and down, then the more energetic they are, the more times they're going up and down, the shorter that wavelength is going to have to be. So higher energy means a higher frequency, so how many up downs they do, as well as a shorter distance between those up downs. So there's this direct relationship between the wavelength, the frequency, and the energy. Typically, when we're talking in terms of wavelength, we're talking in terms of nanometers, which is a billionth of a meter, and it's represented by this lambda sign. So that's light. So if we think about light, though, those little packets of energy can have different amounts of light. As we saw, that was correlated to the frequency, and the anti-correlated to the wavelength. So basically, different wavelengths of light are going to have different frequencies, and they're also going to have different colors. So we're going to perceive them as different colors. If we think about white light, that has all of these different visible colors. So all of these different wavelengths, we call this spectrum that we can see the visible light spectrum. It's only this tiny little portion of what is like really light. So this term electromagnetic radiation, or EMR. If the light is in this range, our eyes will be able to perceive it as a color. If the light is of a lower energy, then you get into things like infrared and microwave and radio, which we need different devices to detect. And if we go higher in energy, we're talking shorter wavelengths, we're talking ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma ray. These we can detect with different devices, and they can also cause damage. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today are ways in which plants can use these molecules, these chromophores, in order to absorb some of this light to prevent it from damaging their molecules. So that's one of the purposes of carotenoids. But first, let's talk about color. So as I said, it's just this part of the spectrum that we can see. But we see different colors because different wavelengths of light have different colors. If we think about sunlight, that has all of the different colors, and it looks white. We can I like to think of these different wavelengths of light as kind of like different like space balls being thrown, different colors. And different molecules have different mitts that allow them to absorb specific light wavelengths, but not others. So they have to have the right mitt in order to absorb that light. When they absorb it, it's kind of like they're stealing it. So you might know the acronym ROY-G-BIV for the colors of the rainbow. Well, what happens is if you steal one of those colors, then the leftover is no longer going to equal white. And so the leftovers are going to look different than what went in. So you don't see the color that you captured, you see the colors that are left over. And you can see what color will be left over if you look at a color wheel and you look at what is absorbed, and then what's across from it is going to be what you see. Don't confuse this with fluorescence. So in fluorescence, molecules are actually giving off or emitting light, and therefore we're going to be seeing the color that they emit. When we're talking about these dyes, though, and these pigments, they're basically just stealing colors, and we're seeing the leftovers. We're not seeing the color that they actually emit. We're just seeing what colors they don't absorb, the colors that they let through, or they bounce off. So this is the idea, but how do these molecules absorb different wavelengths of light? This comes down to their chemical composition. So Atoms in molecules, so like individual carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, these basic building blocks that molecules are made up of, they're made up of even smaller parts called like subatomic particles. So they have each atom at its core is a central nucleus with protons, which are positively charged, and neutrons, which are negatively charged. And then hanging out around them in this big cloud are electrons, which are negatively charged. These electrons, atoms can share pairs of electrons in order to form bonds. So when you see one of those straight lines in the diagram of a structure, such as these straight lines, these are going to represent a single bond, so one pair of electrons being shared. If you see one of these double lines, well, that represents two pairs of electrons being shared. Sometimes what you see is these alternating single and double bonds, sometimes in a line, and sometimes like in a circle, such as in a benzene ring. These are telling you there's something called, these are often telling you there's something called resonance or electron conjugation that's happening, where basically, instead of just sharing with one other atom, these pairs of electrons are shared with multiple. So you have this sharing of, like, you can kind of think of electron like orgy, where they have the ones that are next to each other are sharing with each other, but then they have some leftovers and they all share them communally. And this is going to help stabilize the molecules. So this thing called resonance stabilization. So these molecules are often very stable. And they also have this effect of making it so that it's easier for them to absorb light. This comes down to the fact that in order to actually absorb light, you have to have the right chemical composition so that the wavelength of light that is going to be absorbed is the perfect amount to kind of excite one of those electrons into an excited state. And there are only certain excited states that are allowable. And the amount of energy between these is going to be like quantumized or quantized or whatever, where basically there's distinct amounts of energy that you need to go between different places. You can think of it kind of like an apartment or a hotel floors layout, where the floors are certain spacings apart. So you can't just go part way up to the next floor, where you're going to be in between the floors and you would just like fall back down. That wouldn't be allowed. But if you have the right energy, you can get from floor A to floor B, and then you can stay there for a while. Typically, molecules can't hang out in that excited state for too long, and so they end up getting dispersing that energy somehow. This can be kind of just like fizzling out, so non-radiative relaxation. It can also be like radiative relaxation, where you're actually like releasing light, say. And this is the basis of fluorescence, where a molecule absorbs light, get excited to another excited state, can't hang out there forever, and falls back down, releasing a photon as energy. Going back to the ground state. So a molecule can absorb the amount of energy that's going to allow them to travel to the next state. And we can represent these wavelengths that they could absorb in an absorption spectrum. You'll see that there's multiple like maxima places that the wavelengths they like the most. This can be because there are different parts of the molecule. Molecules don't just have like one pair of electrons or one electron that can get excited, they have lots. And so molecules can have these complex absorption spectra where they're absorbing at multiple wavelengths. And this can make it kind of hard to see what color that they would appear. And it also is going to impact if you're doing some sort of measurement or looking at overlap of different wavelengths absorption. So those are just some technical things to keep in mind. But what actually makes for this overlap is because there's kind of like, because these electrons, although we talk about these different energy states, there's also different vibrational levels within those states. So going back to our hotel or our apartment analogy, it's like you could be standing on the bed or the table or the dresser, and it's going to be a different distance to the next floor. But you can still only absorb the amount of energy that'll take you directly to that next floor. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, but we can see these basic maxima. And when we have these maxima, the molecules are going to look the color opposite of what they absorb. So going back to our color wheel idea, if we want something to look orange, we're going to need to be absorbing this light that is going to be in this like blue-green range. And in fact, if we look at the structure of beta-carotene, we see that it absorbs, so this long dashed line, it's absorbing in these blue and green mostly, and not any in this orange and red. And so if you have a lot of beta carotene, you're going to have a lot of the orange color. And this is why the pumpkin that I was carving yesterday looked orange. But we don't, so why would they have this though? Like, it's pretty for us. And so one reason is that it can be pretty to and attract like seed spreaders to help these plants get eaten, and then their seeds be spread to other places so that the plants can live on. But that's not the only reason. The only other reason is because if we think about the wavelength and the frequency and the energy relationship again, when we're talking about something that looks orange, it's absorbing this blue-green light. This blue-green light is going to be higher energy. And when we think about this higher energy light, it can cause damage. There's similar reasons why it's kind of like, so plants can stock up on these carotenoids like beta-carotene in order to protect them from that highly energetic light that could damage their molecules. It's kind of like a plant sunscreen you can think of. And so therefore, by having a lot of this beta-carotene can protect the plants. The beta-carotene can also serve as a precursor for making vitamin A. When we think about vitamin A, it's basically, it's like a generic term to describe this whole family of interrelated compounds, including active retinoids, which are found in animal sources, and carotenoid precursors found in plants. And so these retinoids have different purposes. They can help with vision, they can help with various storage functions, so lots of different functions. And I should mention too that our bodies can convert the plant versions into the animal versions. And so if you're a vegetarian like me, don't freak out. But anyway, with these, so plants have a high amount of these beta carotene, but not all plants look orange. And some plants, say like kale, have a ton of beta carotene, but they look like dark green. So why is this? It's because they have other molecules too, other chlorophores that can absorb light. So remember here, we're only looking at a single molecule, but plants have lots and lots of different molecules, and they have lots of different pigments, and those pigments all have different absorption spectra. So you can kind of think about it as being like what color you see is going to be the combination of all of these, and the ones that they have the most of are going to kind of like dominate. So if a plant has more of this, a lot of this beta carotene and not a lot of other things, you're going to see orange. But if they have a lot of other things, you'll see a different color. And one of the colors you often see is a green color. That green color is going to come from chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll, there's actually different versions of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll A is the most abundant plant pigment, and it has a maxima of 430. So this peak right here, and 662. So it's absorbing blue light and red light, but not green light. And so what you actually see is the green light that's left over. Now with chlorophyll B, you have a little bit of a more expanded or a little shifted of a spectra. So like 453 and 642 maxima. And this is going to expand the amount of light that can be absorbed. So why do we care about this? Why would they want to have the absorbing light? Well, when we talked about the carotenoids, they were just kind of like absorbing the energy and kind of like dissipating it, so letting it fizzle out before it could cause damage. When we talk about these chlorophylls, though, they're actually taking that light and converting it into a useful form of energy. And so they're converting it into this energy form that can be used for photosynthesis. And so this is how plants get energy in order, you capture sunlight in order to make energy for themselves, make sugar. Some other colors that you might see can come from other compounds in the leaves, such as lutein, and anthocyanins, which make things look like red. And so what color a plant is going to look like is also depends on its life cycle and when it decides it needs more or less of what molecules. So for example, during the fall, you start to see more of these colors come out. This is because plants start making less of the chlorophyll, so those chlorophylls start dying off or degrading, and they don't replenish them. This can be because there's less sunlight available, and so they don't want to waste all their energy on making these sunlight capturing molecules if the sunlight's not there to capture. And so because these start degrading and these are longer lived, you're going to start seeing more of these.
Um, yeah, so what else? This is just from like posts I've done before. Yeah, so for some of these molecules, these color molecules, such as anthocyanins, they actually have to use some glucose to make it. So one of the things about it is it can help attract seed spreaders, also potentially serve as like one of those protectors from the energy, similar to what we saw with beta carotene, prevent from like oxidative damage. So from high energy compounds causing this damage that can lead to things like proteins getting modified in various ways, such as unwanted cross links forming. Yeah, so you want to protect from this. Because it takes glucose to make it, they might not want to spend their energy on making it. But when the leaves are falling off, what happens is that kind of like the plant starts building this barrier between the leaf and the rest of the tree. So when the glucose that was already in the leaves is going to get trapped there, and so since they can't use it for other things and the roots and everything, then it's why not use it for color, right? There's also waste products that can make things look brown and various acts insert that like to ward off predators and that sort of thing. So basically, plants have a lot of different chromophores on different light absorbing molecules, and the color that you ultimately see is going to depend on the color, the relative ratios and amounts of these different chromophores that are present, which will depend on the plant's needs and at that time. And so, yeah, so the same concepts of different molecules absorbing different wavelengths comes into play all over the place, both in nature and in the lab. And hope this helps you understand and appreciate color.